Today's book is called Pocket Rocks by Sheree Fitch, illustrator Helen Flook. Permission to read from Access Copyright on behalf of publisher Orca Books Publishers. There once was a boy named Ian Gooby. Every morning he looked into the mirror to say hello to himself. His chin was pointy and his forehead was wide. Just like an upside-down triangle, he said, and scrunched up his nose. Scrunch, scrunch, scrunch. Every morning, Ian Gooby knocked on his head. Knock, knock. Time to come out, he said. He brushed his hair, soft as dandelion fuzz or a whisper. Ian Gooby smiled his widest smile. Ian, time for school, called his mother. Ian Gooby's smile drooped and wobbled and turned into a scribbly line. The thing of it was, Ian wished every day was someplace else, or summertime, or Saturday. He wished he could go any place else but school. It wasn't his teacher. He liked Mrs. Dingle. Mrs. Dingle's voice was a marshmallow, and she smelled like lemon shampoo. He liked BJ too. His eyes were as brown and kind as melting chocolate chips. But even with BJ's help, no matter how hard Ian Gooby tried, he could not do the things everyone else could do. "Ian," called his mother in her hurry-up voice. Ian Gooby wanted to crawl inside the mirror and stay there all day. Instead, his hands turned into a sad little butterfly. He waved goodbye to himself and went to school. Day after day was the same until the morning Ian found a rock. A rock the size and shape of an egg, but not white. A rock as black as shoe polish, still in the tin and speckled all over with teeny white freckles. Ian picked up the rock. It was smooth and cool against his cheek. Ian sniffed the rock. Sometimes smells made pictures in his head. Ian closed his eyes. Swish, swoosh, swish. Ian was flying in a tunnel of wind. He looped and spiraled and dipped and swooped until he landed in an emerald green jungle. Ian opened his eyes. "Jungle rock," he said with a giggle. Ian cradled the rock in his hand. "Rock-a-bye, rock-a-bye, rock-a-bye rock," he whispered. When he was sure the rock was fast asleep, he tucked it into his pocket, his left pocket, and went into school. That day, Ian tried his hardest ever when it was time for printing. BJ helped. But every line that was meant to stand up fell down, and every line that was meant to be straight curled like the curliest hair on Ian Gooby's head. Ian Gooby got a fluttery feeling in his belly, as if a small bird were in there trying to get free. Then he remembered, inside his pocket was a whole other world. Thinking of Jungle Rock made the fluttery feeling go away. Ian Gooby smiled and kept trying to print. Every day for many days, Ian put rocks in his pockets. Moon Rock and King Rock, Turtle Rock and Tiger Rock, Kangaroo Rock, and many, many more. Swish, swoosh, swish. With every rock, he flew away in a tunnel of wind and landed in whole other worlds. When he opened his eyes, he whispered to each and every rock, "Rock-a-bye, rock-a-bye, rock-a-bye rock." When he was sure they were all fast asleep, He tucked them into his pockets, left and right. In school, his pencil was still not much of a friend. He tried to make a tent with legs, and it turned into a vase. He put flowers in it. He tried to make a mountain and a valley, but it turned into a Z. But when his heart pounded or his head filled with too much noise, he remembered his rockabye rocks. They were his friends. Swish, swish, swish. They flew him away in tunnels of wind until he landed in whole other worlds. Day after day was the same, until the day of the disaster. What do you think is going to happen? At recess, Ian was making something for BJ with his rockabye rocks. The bell rang, but Ian Gooby wasn't finished. That was bad enough. But things got worse. Fast as he could, Ian Gooby scooped up the rocks he hadn't used, stuffed them into his pockets, and ran toward the class. Too many rocks. Ian Gooby had stuffed too many rocks in his pockets, and while he was running, his pants fell down. Ian stopped, stone still. Somebody laughed. Ian Gooby's got rocks in his head. His pants fell down and his face is red, shouted Trevor. He was the fastest printer and reader in the whole class. Shh, Mrs. Dingle said, that's enough. Her voice was hard as burnt marshmallow. Ian Gooby never remembered much about the next 15 minutes. Except his voice was a siren. BJ took him to the quiet room. He waited until Ian stopped being a fire engine. He waited until there was nothing left to blow from Ian Gooby's nose. Now, let's go back to class, BJ said. We've got a visitor. Ian took BJ's hand, but he kept his head down just in case he could find a rockabye rock. Of course, there were none to be found. The visitor looked like an upside-down capital T. His hair was the color of squash. Ian did not like squash. His beard looked like a small broom stuck to his chin. Some stories are read, some stories are said, and some stories rhyme, said the man in a trumpety voice. Once upon a time, he began. He told story after story after story. Ian closed his ears. He closed his eyes. I want my rockabye rocks, he hissed. Later, Ian, said BJ. I promise when the stories are over. But when the stories were over, the children had questions. How long have you been collecting stories? Asked Sue Ellen. For a long time, said the man, but when I was a boy, I collected rocks. Always had rocks in my pockets, still do. He reached into his pocket and held one up. Ian stared at the man with the rock in his hand. He nodded his head up and down. BJ looked at the man. The man looked at BJ. They nodded their heads too. It was Ian's turn, with BJ's help, to tell his story. The man scratched his whiskers when Ian got to the part about his pants falling down. He whispered a secret in Ian's ear. Your whiskers tickle, said Ian. They're not scratchy like a broom at all. The storyteller laughed and gave Ian the rock. Everyone clapped, even Trevor. As always, BJ kept his promise. He took Ian outside to pick up his rockabye rocks. Let's put them in a can for now, Ian, he said. But Ian tugged at BJ's arms. Over there, he said. Ian worked so hard that he bit his tongue. Then he stood back so that BJ could see his present. The straight line of rocks hardly squiggled. The tent was a tent with legs. What did he spell? Not a vase filled with flowers. And instead of a Z, he had made a mountain and a valley. I-A-N, shouted BJ. Ian, you did it. BJ picked Ian up and swirled him around and around in a tunnel of wind. They're very happy. Ian has spelled his own name with the rocks all by himself. Nowadays, Ian Gooby keeps rocks all over his house. He keeps them in boxes and cans and baskets. He has a pouch for rocks that Mrs. Dingle made especially for him. He still keeps a few rocks in his pockets, and he never worries about his pants. There he is, on his bed with his rocks. This story is a true story, although I changed it some, and Ian Gooby is a real boy, although I did not use his real name. And I am the storyteller who found out Ian's story of the rocks and the falling down pants, but I do not have squashy hair or wear polka dot suspenders. I do have piles of rocks in corners all over my house, for I have learned that rocks, like stories, have secret worlds hidden inside them that make me feel safe. By Sheree Fitch, the author. Have a great day, everybody. See you next time.